So what's the difference between a core wound and a limiting belief? That's the subject of today's video. Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and on this channel I strive to give you tips and strategies to heal your attachment style and to have your very best life in relationships. And if you want any more help with anything, perhaps get on my mailing list below. I send out occasional tips and strategies. And, I do 20-minute consultation calls, partly to assess if it's fit for coaching with me. But I also have a lot of resources I can point you towards as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, so fairly quick video today. Just wanted to tease out core wounds and limiting beliefs because we hear about both of them. We probably, in general, out in society, hear about limiting beliefs more. Sometimes people will just say beliefs or negative beliefs. But limiting beliefs is probably the more common one in the world of attachment theory. We talk about core wounds a lot. So I just wanted to tease out like what they are and the differences since we talk about them so much. And they do sort of layer onto each other. As you'll see as I'm talking about them, but I think that making the distinctions is important as well. Okay, so let's start with core wounds. Core wounds are often set very early in life. They can get set by a particular, large event traumatically that happens. And that can mean large in the sense of we think of it large even if we look back at it now, or it could be something that just felt very big to us when we were little. It can also be sort of over time. So we can develop core wounds, particularly when we're younger, because we're so impressionable. We're actually often in the more impressionable brainwave state, actually, for a lot of our early life. So that over time, sort of smaller things that happen, but that create a negative belief can also happen as well. So longer term, and it can even somewhat happen from modeling. From a parent or caregiver that we're seeing it from. So often set very early in life. And then what happens is they tend to be reinforced. I mean, they don't just tend to be, they pretty much are. That's why we still have them. And the reason they are, though, is because we have that lens going out. So as we go out into the world, we live the rest of our lives. When we have those core wounds and they're addressed, we are filtering information that's coming in and feedback that's coming in through that lens. And that will tend to then reinforce the core wound. So, for example, if we think that we are not competent, and there can be different words we put around that, but there's sort of a particular core wound that's around I am incompetent, or I'm unable to affect change, or they can be sort of different flavors for different people. So if that happens, then we're going to tend to notice, right, all the times that it's something that we would perceive as that being the cause. We might also perceive that as the cause when it's not. And then we also will tend to not even notice or like really take in, counterexamples of where we are showing competency or getting feedback around that. So core wounds also tend to be big and broad. I am not safe, for example, is a core wound across the anxious attachment styles. And that means dismissive avoidant, anxious preoccupied, and fearful avoidant. It shows up in different ways and different flavors, right? But this sort of sense of just sort of not being okay in various circumstances and throughout different areas of life is a consistent one there. And so if you think about all the different ways that could show up and all the different flavors of it, you can see it's a very broad and kind of abstract thing in a way. And another example would be something like I will be abandoned, or I'm disconnected. So there are these pretty big, broad things that are a core wound. And then related to that, they usually show up in all areas of life, sometimes not every single area of life. So, for example, you could have, when I said about like competence, perhaps like work is the one place you feel competent, but you don't feel competent in relationships or with friends, or like in how you manage your health. So it doesn't have to literally be every single area of life, but it's often very, very widespread, partly because it's so broad, right? It's this overall belief about really about your core self and who you are as a person and how you interact with the world very, very broadly and generally. Okay, so what about limiting beliefs? So limiting beliefs can layer on to a core wound and be something that's related. They can also show up just separately, but like core wounds, they often are due to something negative that happened, whether a small trauma, whether it's negative feedback that you got, and perhaps you got it, a couple different times in a short space of time, and then that created a belief that it's something that like is true, all the time. And they can sometimes also be passed down in a family. So if your family has particular limiting beliefs, I mean, I think we can see how that just feels true culturally, right? That a family culture can lead to all kinds of beliefs, and some of those are these limiting beliefs. And then an example of how it could layer onto a core wound as opposed to being a separate belief or a family belief that was passed down. Let's say you have an I am abandoned core wound. Let's say you're an anxious preoccupied person, you have an I am abandoned core wound. You might have something else that's layered onto it, like partners always leave me right as I get to my most vulnerable, and I'm really sharing that with them, right? So that could be a limiting belief that's related and sort of layered onto that I will be abandoned core wound. And so, as you can also probably see from those examples, they tend to be more specific. Actually, I would say they just are more specific than a core wound, because if something is much broader, it would be the core wound. However, they do have different levels of how specific they are. So you could have something like, as specific as like partners always leave me at the 3-month mark, to, something just a little bit broader, like people seem to hesitate a little bit when I share things more vulnerably. So there can be sort of a whole range of specificity, but they are more specific than a core wound. And they can also be in different areas of life potentially, but they don't have to be. So an example where it could be in multiple areas of life is, let's say that someone thinks that whenever they give a presentation at work, they always feel like people are judging like how well effectively they communicate. So someone could have that as super specific, like it's always work presentations, but there could be someone who feels like it's more around their oral communication in general, and that person might feel like friends judge them when they speak and try to talk about a topic, and like the presentations at work go that way. So it could be in a couple different areas, for example. But they tend not to be as widespread in all the areas of life as core wounds, though there could be an exception to that. So just to recap that a little bit, how a core wound and a limiting belief come about are similar in the sense that it was something, negative feedback or traumatic moment, but core wounds tend to for sure be either from younger or from a very much more big kind of negative event or traumatic event. And limiting beliefs don't necessarily have to be to that level. They can, sort of be imprinted on us in like a lot of different ways. Core wounds can sometimes come from our family and the modeling. Limiting beliefs, probably more so, that happens sometimes. And then they do both get reinforced by, when our lens being that they're true, believing they're true on a deep level, somewhat more consciously often with limiting beliefs, very subconsciously with core wounds. But there is this way in which there's that continual reinforcing. Unless we're dealing with them and trying to heal them and change them. And then core wounds tend to be more abstract and cover more areas of life that they influence, and limiting beliefs less so with the areas of life and tend to be more specific, though there's a whole range. Okay, so finally, to leave it on a positive note, because they can be changed, let's do a comparison of what we can do about them and how they're healed. So really big picture, identifying them, being able to identify them and go in and figure out what's going on for both is really, really key and important so that we can address them, right? And there's various ways to do this. It often helps to be talking to a coach or a therapist, but you could potentially do it on your own too. And often a good way to do it is to, assess in a situation, try to notice like what you believe about a lot of situations. And if you started keeping track of that, you might notice some patterns. And then, I'm really big into subconscious reprogramming. I can do it through breath work. We can do it in other ways where you are coming up with sort of a whole subconscious reprogramming list and working on a specific thing at a time, and doing it right before bed, that kind of thing. So there's lots of ways to work with subconscious reprogramming, and that is especially done for core wounds. It can be done for limiting beliefs as well, but I would say subconscious reprogramming is very necessary for core wounds because they often are so subconscious, right? So we have to work at them in that kind of a way where we're really trying to use repetition, use possibly different brainwave states to get at them and to really try to address them. And it's more possible with limiting beliefs to use something like just reframing, and challenging them and coming up with alternative explanations that can help us to start to see why they're not true. So you can do that as a very you can try to just challenge things in the moment if you notice the belief and think of counter explanations. Like, let's say it seemed like someone was being negative with you. You could say to yourself, well, it might not have been about me. Maybe they're having a bad day. I mean, that's just a very quick, easy example that a lot of us do out in the real world. But if you're struggling with a particular belief, you may not be doing it for that belief yet. And then there's also actually, coaches and therapists can also take you through very specific processes. There's one called the work, for example, where you really go through a step-by-step process to challenge and to reframe a particular limiting belief. So hopefully that gives you hope that if you do have some that you're starting to notice, or you suspect that you have some, that there really are ways to work with them and to change them. And then that can be so freeing, for both, really, because limiting beliefs can sort of like aggravate us by sort of being there constantly in our minds as sometimes our negative thoughts, and absolutely influence us. And then these core wounds, I mean, they're so huge, right? They're affecting how we are in relation with others and our sense even of self in the world, sometimes to some extent. So please have hope that you can change them, and hopefully it was helpful to understand some of the distinctions around them and how they come into play in our lives. And thank you so much for watching. If you have any other ideas for content, or if you have a comment or question on this, please use the comments below.